So I want to pursue the extra credit component a bit. I'm not going to do the whole section of it, but I want to pursue it enough so that we can show you this problem that comes up. And the problem is not when you're saving a new purchase. It's when you're trying to then retrieve the purchases after you've just saved one, and you go back and you try and view all of the transactions. And we're getting a null return value on the connected table. It's something that I have encountered in other environments, particularly the Microsoft SQL Server environment. When you're writing data, you're inserting data into a table that has an auto-increment identity type field, and so that's the source of the issue. But I haven't actually seen it discussed much on the Java JPA side from what I could encounter. So we'll show it, demonstrate it, and then talk about a solution. And as I was saying at the beginning of class, one of the weird things is that 2 of the extra credit assignments that were submitted, or assignments that were submitted that had the extra credit, didn't show the problem, and I could not figure out why they didn't show the problem. So I think they should show the problem. I just don't know why they're not. But let's begin. If you recall, on our current process, we have a servlet all the way up to the add trans JSP. So it's the servlet that loads the add trans does a connection pool. In our example, it uses a connection pool, the old style technology, to pull all the codes from TBL codes and build the container object that you need to then have the JSP produce the dropdown. So what my application doesn't have yet is the post-transaction servlet. I'm going to add a sort of a stub, as little as I can get away with, to build it and demonstrate the issue. If you want to, I'm still going to allow, I think I said in my announcement, I'm still going to allow submission of projects with the extra credit. I've just downgraded the value of the extra credit because we are doing part of it here. But if you wanted to submit it with extra credit, you would also want to fix this process here where we pull records from TBL codes to build our container, our array list. You'll want to do that with JPA instead. But I'm not going to bother with that because we can show the other problem without having to do that. So if we look at add trans, it is the input form with my version does build the transaction code drop-down list, and then the form action is post-trans. So what I need to do in my servlets is add a post-trans servlet. So I'm going to right-click and go for a new servlet. And those of you who haven't submitted an assignment with a working final section on the add trans, I don't mind if you use this code that we're developing. Okay, so this is post-trans servlet. If I could spell it. And we will add this one to our web XML file and remove the servlet from the post-trans URL call. And that'll get us our starting point. And we'll remove the usual stuff that we don't need. And so the task of this post-trans servlet is to pull the data out of the form and write it into the database. And so we'll do this with JPA. That will mean that we build a purchase object. I just want to double check. I had one little problem on my purchase object. No, this one is okay. On the sample I was working from at home, my overloaded constructor wasn't right, but this overloaded constructor will work. So we're going to pull the data out of the form and call this overloaded constructor to build the purchase object, and then use a JPA call to save the data. So if you look at purchase DB, we have the get purchases process, but we don't have any method to write data. So I think I'll go ahead and build that first. And in fact, doing that is going to be very much like the member DB where we did the update. So I'm going to grab some code from member DB, which will be update member, and I'm actually just going to grab this code inside, and I'll write my own method call here. So we're going to Control-C that, and then go to purchase DB, and so this will be a public static, I guess, string, because we're returning a message, and I called it post purchase. Doesn't really matter what you call it. And then a purchase object P comes into this method, and then I'm going to paste in my member DB code and make the appropriate changes. So we've got the import for the entity transaction. And we still, as we look through our code now, we're still going to get the factory, the entity manager from the factory. Then we have an entity transaction. I don't know why the trans begin. I haven't looked into this. I think we mentioned it when we were looking at member. I've seen it both inside the try and outside the try. I just feel a little bit more comfortable with it inside the try catch, but I don't think our Muroc author did it that way, but it should work either way. So we're going to, now, this was a question that came up just before we started and I want to address. So we are going to ask JPA to update the database based on our purchase object that we send to it, but I'm going to use the persist call on our transaction, our entity manager, so the question was about, well, merge versus persist. So a merge does more checking of the database for consistency before it does its operation. You could use a merge here. It will do both an update or an insert. It'll figure out which one it's supposed to do. But it's also considered to have a lot more overhead. And so persist, if you know you're adding a record, or even if you're updating, but if you're adding, persist is considered just a more efficient way of doing it. But the real reason that I'm using persist instead of merge is that my fix for our add did not work if a merge call was done. And so that's an even additional issue that we need to look into. So if we do a persist and we observe this data consistency problem, there's a fix. But when it was a merge, there wasn't a fix. And that really baffled me. So I'm baffled on two fronts here. So our message is purchase added, or purchase add error. And that should do it. So we should be in pretty good shape as far as the JPA call to update the database. Okay. Now let's see. Let's run clean and build and see if it's satisfied that all my errors are gone. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the post-transaction servlet. And remember that our goal is to build a purchase object P, which of course won't have the ID code, which is the auto increment code in the database. but we will be building an object, purchase, and the URL string for the return is to just go back to the add trans JSP page, because they can continue to add transactions as often as they need to. Oh, let's do an import here so we get our purchase object in place. And then I've got a string message, which is my normal messaging feature between servlets and JSP pages. And then I'm going to use some variables for the pieces of a purchase, which has both the member ID and then the purchase date and the transaction type and transaction code and amount. So I'm going to have a string for transaction date because it comes in from the form that way. And then I'm going to have a double. Oh, but no, excuse me. Before that, I'm going to have a date, pdate, which I'll initialize to null. So that's going to take the converted date. And I'm not, obviously, at this level, I'm not going to do any date checking. I'm just going to process it in. So you would want to add some date checking if you do it on your own. Let's see, Java utility date. Yeah, so the utility date is what we want. And then a double for the amount. And oh yes, well, you don't have to do it as lowercase. That's interesting. Incompatible types, int cannot, I don't have an int. Well, anyway, pardon? This is weird. Yeah, if you want to use the class double, you'd use 0.0, yeah. Yeah, that was the problem. It was looking at my 0 int. So you could use class double if you want. A regular double should be fine as well. Okay, and you know, we ran into that when we were doing reflection in Java 2, and the fact that we needed class versions of the entities in some of our Java objects, but that's not an issue for us here. Okay, so let's grab. I'll do all of this in a try-catch, and so we need to grab from the server the objects that we know about. So member M is a member cast of the request, get session, get attribute, and the attribute is M in this project. So let's bring that down here, and then an import for business.member. And then I'm going to pull, I've got that array list of transcode objects, so I better make sure that I built it as a transcode. So in my add trans servlet, yes, so each PBL code entry was turned into a transcode data-backed bean. So I have that as codes on my session, so we'll call for that one as well. So I will have an array list of transcode objects called codes that I can retrieve from the session. So I'll bring that down here as well. So that'll be an array list of transcode objects from the request, get session, get attribute for codes. That's kind of a long line. Okay, well, that's as much as I can get on it. Now we need some imports again, so the import for business transcode, and then the import for array list, Java util array list, and it should be happy with our object. Okay, so we've recovered the two main memory objects, and now I'm going to pull a string TC for the actual transcode that went with the record they submitted. So TC will be a request get parameter, and trans CD lowercase should be the name. Let me double check that on my add trans JSP. Whoops. There we go. Yeah, transcode ID and name on my select object. So if you pull just the transcode object, you should get, if I could put an equal sign where it's supposed to be, you should get the actual entry, the value that they chose when they submitted the form. So you don't get the whole list, but that does mean that we're going to need to go through the list. Oh, you know what else I need to do up here? I forgot to do. I want to declare a transcode object TCD, and because of the way I'm writing this, the system is going to want it instantiated. It'll think it might not be instantiated if I don't. Anyway, so I've got a TCD object, and now I need to match. In order to get the trans type, I need to match it or pull it out of the transcode object, but of course I just have a TC string which tells me what the code was. So I'm going to go through my array list of codes and find the correct matching transcode entity. So we'll do it this way: for transcode T in the codes collection, if T get transcode equals the TC object that came in from the form, then I want TCD to be equal to my T object. So a for each structure, I'm just wanting to find the transcode entry that I know was in codes, and I match it. So every T is a transcode object, and I can run the get transcode on T and see if that equals the TC that they selected. And there shouldn't be a case issue here because it's a drop down on the form. So the value that they comes back to us should be from the TBL or from the codes array list that went into it. Okay, so now I've got member for my member ID. I've got a transcode object for the trans type and description. I need the date. So I'm going to do this in another try-catch inside my main try-catch. And so TDT, my string, is a request get parameter for trans date. I guess I could have done this in one step. And then using the simple date format BT, new simple date format using the year hyphen mm hyphen dd structure, which is just what the form expects them to enter. And I'm not doing any real validation on this. Okay, so we do our import. Then I will try to set, and this is the reason it's in a try-catch, I will try to set pdate equal to the dt parse of tdt. And if all goes well, we have pdate. But if we catch an exception, then I'm going to set a message And again, this servlet structure is crude. You'll want to improve it in many ways if you end up submitting it again for extra credit. Because I'm going to set a message plus equal to purchase date error, but I'm not really doing all of the controls that I should do here. We'll add a break line after that. Because at this point, I'm really assuming that I did get a date, even though messages. Well, I guess I'm doing some checking here. Okay, now we have our amount. Let's see, we've got member ID, we've got transcode, we've got trans date, and we need amount. So the amount variable will equal double. I'll do this in one line the way I should have done above. Double parse double of a request get parameter, and the field on the form is trans AMT. And I'm assuming all went well there, but if not, we'll catch exception E, which really can just be a number format exception. Trans amount error, get message plus break. Okay. If message is empty, so I got this far and didn't have to throw a message, an error message into my string anywhere. I probably should double check that I did in fact find a transcode entry in my collection and that I do have a member object and other things like that. But anyway, if message is empty, we will write the data. So I'm going to set P, my purchase object, as a new purchase, and we will use the m.getMemID, and then pdate, and then the transaction type. Let's see, what was my order on my purchase objects? It was transaction type, and then the code, and then the amount. All right, so back to my servlet. So transaction type comes from the TCD object, so we will get the transaction type, and then we will get the transaction code itself, which was TC, from up above, and then wait a minute, let me look at that again. Yeah, member ID, purchase date, transaction type, transaction code, and amount. So there's no description in the transaction. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. I can say this right. Okay. And amount. Wait a minute, let me look at something here. Okay. My program at home is a little different than this. I'm going to have to adjust here on the fly. I hope it still shows the error. Okay, and then message will be equal to, so once I build the purchase object, I will try to post it. So I will use a purchase database dot post purchase call with P, and then the assigned value is never used. Oh, message. Well, not yet it is. Okay, and then we're going to catch any other kind of global exception E as message plus equal general error plus E dot get message plus break line. Okay. Okay. Set my message into my request object. And move on. I'll just grab that from my other servlet, any servlet we want down here. Request dispatcher and servlet context. Okay. So that should be enough to take the purchase object that we just created, write it into the database. Okay. Okay. So I think we're ready to test. Let me bring up my MySQL window so that we can check this step by step. So we'll use Club 294, show tables. All right, let's see. If I select star from TBL purchases, where mem ID is equal to A043, I'll use our first author, our first member here. Okay, so we've got 19 rows. So let's minimize that and see if we can get a save underway here. So I'll clean and build. That is the main project, yeah. And we'll run it. Okay. 18, I think, is the default. Log on. Unable to authenticate. Really? Oh, I changed it. All right, we'll try again. Mine's now 180. Okay, so if we view transactions, I don't have my totaling, which you were going to add back, but let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I've got 19 entities. So back to the members screen, let's try to add a transaction. And so on 2016 at the beginning of this month, 10/1, I'm going to add dues, and we'll call it $100. So I'm going to try a post transaction. Oh, I don't have a message. Maybe I don't have the message displaying. I'll have to go back and look at that. Anyway, return to member screen with apparently, well, I don't know. Well, let's double check it in here. Let's run the TBL purchases where MEMID is A043. Yes, so it did add a D transaction type of 01 and put the amount in as 100. So it's in the database. If I then ask to view the transactions, there we go, that's the error I wanted to see. It crashes. And it crashes because, in fact, it may even tell us why it crashes. Yeah, error reading trans description on type business.purchase. Oh, you did have this problem. So how did you fix it? Ah, okay. Well, so your code was, yes. Yes, so that's what I wanted to show. So it's a data consistency error. So if you, I guess I didn't look carefully enough in your code. So if you stop the application and rerun it and ask for the record and view the transactions, the next time through it works. It's there. Because it does it's a new session, it's a new call to the JPA. So the issue, and then if you go back, in fact, let me do this. Let me run it with debugging. So if we debug the oh, sorry, that's not going to help me, is it? Because I haven't set a breakpoint. Now let's see if I can set a breakpoint while I'm here. No. Okay, so where do I want to, let's see, where do I want to set my breakpoint? I want to set my breakpoint at the view. So it's not the add transaction which is producing the problem. But if I go to my view of my show purchases and let's see, this one gets my list back. Okay, so here we go. So the purchases does a get purchases right here, and so if I'm going to do a display here, I'm going to stop and examine my purchases object just before it redisplays. Okay, so let's run a debug with that in place. Okay, so we view the transactions and it's waiting because it wants me to show. And so if I look at purchases, if I do a drop down, there are 20 of them, and I can examine any of them, and they all look right. So that's not a problem. So we'll go through this first time, and we get our list. Looks good. Back to the member screen. Add transactions, and we'll add a transaction for the second day of the month, which was a food purchase of $22.50. And we post the transaction. I'm still not showing my message. I should. And we return to member screen. Okay, so here we go to view transactions. And it's stopped. And if I look at my purchases, there are now 21 objects. And if I look at the last object and open it up, there's our problem. Transcode is null, and when I go to my purchase object to receive or to pull the transcode detail, I haven't put a check in for null. So one of the solutions that was put out there, anyway, if I go ahead, I get the crash again. So there's the crash. So one workaround, which wasn't a great solution, but at least it kept your program from crashing, was in the purchase object where you are doing a get trans, wait a minute, where is it? Get trans description, and you're using the transcode get trans description method, you can put a check there to see if transcode is null, because transcode is the connected table object. So, but that just means that you're going to get the result, and you'll get some kind of error message. And so some, at least one, Mr. Ewan, I guess, did that, where he checked for a null, and if it was null, he just put out an error type code. So Lynn said that when you, so your solution was actually when you built the purchase object, is to go ahead and set transcode. At the time you built the purchase object, you set transcode, and so that fixed the problem, even though it was a database call issue. Interesting. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Well, that's a fair. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, and that's okay. But the only thing that's really missing from that was really a part of the purchase that was the connected object, the only thing really is the description. So transcode is a part of the purchase, is a native part of the purchase, as is trans type. But anyway, all of that said, here's an alternative solution that is the kind of thing, as I said, that I've had to do in other environments, because you've done an insert, but you don't really have a connection to the actual updated object. And so what you can do, back in your purchase DB, is you can refresh the object after the transaction is committed. So if you do an EM after you commit the transaction, there is a refresh method, and if you refresh on P, that will reconnect the purchase and the transcode entities. So let's not make a liar out of me. Let's run it and see that that does in fact work. So we'll go through our steps. So this time through, we're able to see all the transactions through day 2. Then I'll add a transaction on day 3. We'll add sports bar, drink in the sports bar. Okay, so 1999. Post the transaction, return to member screen, and view transactions, and there it is. But, as I don't know if I said on recording or off recording, when we were talking about the persist versus the merge, this solution did not seem to work when you used merge as your method for adding the purchase object. So I just want to double check that and see if because I was doing a lot of stuff stuff at the time, a lot of testing. So if we change our purchase DB to merge and then try to refresh, I think it throws an error. And I think it'll throw the error when we go to save it, actually. So let's clean and build and then run it. So I'm going to go straight to an add transaction, 201610.0, I guess we're up to 4, and we'll add a no-show fee, $25. Oh, and you know what? Because I'm not showing my messages, I'm not sure I'm getting... Oh, it added it. Well, let's see. Hold on. That's interesting. It crashed again. Yeah. So because when you use a merge and you refresh the object, it's not refreshing it with the transcode item added, and I have no idea why. So the refresh works. Now there's another method that was suggested by somebody. I was looking at an online comment, and what was the other message or method besides refresh? Not sure. Hold on. Flush was also suggested after that possibly the object hadn't been fully posted to the database, or that the JPA was flush was. So it might be something you could you could play around with. But so refresh works if you're using persist. I think I might like the idea of just going ahead and building your purchase object with the correct transaction code object at the time you do the save, because you've got it all there in your servlet anyway. You've got the TCD object, and I realize, yes, I've got naming issues going between my objects and my servlet here, but it's a peculiar problem. Well, what it does is it updates the data store with this object. So it essentially does a reread against the database, and therefore you've got the correct ID. One of the problem that was coming up in my other environments at other times was that after you write the record, you don't know what the auto increment ID was until you go back and reread the object from the database. And so that's what the refresh was basically doing, rereading it to so that you had the auto increment ID, and at the same time you get the transcode link rebuilt. Right. Well, it essentially repulls that entity, and the entity has the one-to-one, and so it because the transaction code is now there, it pulls the correct linking record. But the weird thing is, why does a persist or a merge not do that? And it's not really clear, except that you've got an object in memory which has been written to the database but not refreshed from the database, and so you're missing the data. You're missing both the transcode and the auto increment. Well, the refresh just rereads. It does another select basically on the object. Yes. So purchase has only the information we put into it. It's not been synced with the database. I don't know. It's right. So when you view transactions, you are doing a get purchases call, is what you're saying. But you would think, but it's not. Yeah. Yes. There's right. There's something mysterious in the way that JPA is managing the data entities, so that even though you're running a new get purchase call, which should pull, it hasn't. That's right. It hasn't. It doesn't refresh the object that you just saved down here. And why there? As I say, I have not been able to find a definitive discussion about this issue in the JPA sites. That is a good question. So the question is, will it work differently in Hibernate? And we probably ought to find out, because what I decided to do, just to let you know, that there is a new assignment out there, and this was, as I said off recording at the start, this was not the assignment that I intended. I'm still working on the main assignment, but the main assignment that I was working on is kind of expanded, and I think we're going to end up starting struts with it. So we're going to do both Hibernate and struts. So I wanted to do a little simpler Hibernate introduction, and it is a familiar database. It's the other database project from Java 3, and I know a couple of folks in the class did in fact work on Eclipse Link with the final project, so you're ahead of the game, but I made a few changes. So let's just take a quick look. There's a slightly modified database for this. So Henry Books with for IS-294 is a different script, so you'll need to download and run that script as well. Whoops, did I put that in the wrong spot? I bet I just put everything in the wrong spot. Let me do this again. Oh, no, that's right. No, it wasn't right. Okay. And there is, for your amusement, a working but old-style version of the final project in Java 3, the Henry Books project. You can download that and play with it. I won't need it tonight, but I'll go ahead and put it out here. It doesn't even use connection pools. It just uses the old-style JDBC connections, and so you use it as a a place you can go to scavenge some code and web pages and so forth. But don't use it as your default project. I would build a new project before you go any further with it. Anyway, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to use Hibernate and do the same kind of thing. So we've got a number of screens that are a part of the Henry Books operation. Got a login screen for the users that have either the admin or view-only capability. And then we've got the 4 stores in Henry Books, and you're going to choose a store. And the idea is you're going to view the inventory and update the inventory. So all of those functions need to remain the same. And I tell you what, I'm going to run my script here. And show you the slight changes in the database. So if I use Henry Books underscore IS294 and show tables, there the main change is that the book list, if you describe book list, and I realize many of you have been away from this one for a while, so I'm going quickly through this for time purposes, but in the original Java 3 version of this, book list just had the publisher displayed full name. And so what I've done is I've added a dependent table. So publisher in book list is now a code. So if we select star from book list, we get a publisher code, and that publisher code links to the publisher table. Select star from publisher. And so there's your code and the information. So one of the things that I want you to do, which is a change from the way the Java 3 app worked, I want you to add publisher name, code and name, into the inventory display. So that'll change that, and you'll have the the table dependency to work out in Hibernate. And then the other thing, of course, is that we're going to use JPA, use Hibernate, for posting the data, the inventory updates. And the one other thing, so you've got a couple of items listed here. So step one is to put JPA using Hibernate throughout. So single entities plus the dependent tables, and get them all working with JPA down to the update of the inventory. And then step two is you're going to add a new book screen. So on the new book screen, it's going to be a lot like add transaction or add purchase transaction. The only issue that you need to realize here is that when a new book is added to the book list table, it actually has to be added to every branch. Because if you look at the book list, we'll describe book list again. It's that's not it. It's the inventory table. Let me show the tables. That would be a good idea. Book inventory. There we go. So if we describe book inventory, that has an ID and a store ID. So a book ID and a store ID, and then an on-hand number. And so when a new book goes into the system, you actually have to post it in every store, and that you just post it as a zero. What we'll do now, and the spec says, just post it as a zero inventory item in every store, and then they have to go back and use the regular inventory update screen to change the inventory count on those books. And I did add a few auto increments here and there where it seemed appropriate, like the book inventory. That may have been actually the only one that I had to do. So book inventory has a record number auto increment field. So I'm hoping that we'll get a couple of weeks out of this project, and I'm also hoping that I can leave good portions of it to you, since we've done the same kind of thing with ClubDB, now translating it into Hibernate. But I will issue a recording. I keep promising these weekend recordings and I don't get to them. But I will try to issue a recording by this weekend to get you started in Hibernate, because some of the terminology is a little different than Eclipse Link, and get you going and then see what you can do. The other thing that I've done, and I do this with hesitation, but under course content, I had talked about another book, the Just Hibernate text. I went ahead and posted the PDF. I'm not completely convinced that I want to use that text. It's almost too short. It's almost too dense or too terse in its discussion of some issues, but it might give you an overview. The big text that was indicated for the course, that's the project text by our authors, does have the Hibernate information in it as well. If you don't have that big text yet, I would still wait just a bit. I want to keep working through both of these, just Hibernate and the project text that I indicated at the start of the course, and give you a definitive, yeah, here's the one we're really using, or here's not, and we'll have recordings to get you going up till then. Okay, well, there you go. I'm considering ClubDB well and truly finished, but you can still do a resubmission if you wish to. And if you could figure out why the refresh doesn't work with the merge operation, I would love to know. But that's the only outstanding head scratcher right now.